The silence had become her sanctuary, broken only by the soft whickers and gentle breathing of the horses in the stable where Victoria Navarro had taken refuge 3 weeks ago after her father's death. She stood in the dim morning light filtering through the slats of the barn, her hands trembling as she brushed the chestnut mare named Copper, whispering words in Spanish that she had not spoken to another human soul since that terrible day in April of 1882, when the fever had taken him. Lead, South Dakota sprawled before her like a wound in the earth, the mine shafts cutting deep into the Black Hills, bringing fortune to some and misery to many. The town had grown wild and desperate around the promise of gold, and Victoria's father, Miguel Navarro, had come here with dreams of honest work as a blacksmith, bringing his daughter north from Santa Fe after her mother died giving birth to a stillborn son. Now Victoria was alone, 18 years old with calloused hands and a heart that felt like stone, living in the small room above the livery stable where her father had worked, speaking only to the animals who could not judge her grief or demand explanations for why she had survived when he had not. The horses understood her in ways that people could not. They listened to her pain without offering empty platitudes, accepted her tears without awkwardness, and asked nothing of her except gentle care and kindness. Copper nuzzled her shoulder as Victoria murmured about the nightmares that still woke her, about finding her father's body cold in his bed, about the loneliness that pressed against her ribs like a physical weight. She did not notice the cowboy watching from the stable entrance, his hat pulled low against the morning sun, his posture still as carved wood. Harrison Kane had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes, listening to the cadence of her Spanish words, the soft reassurances she gave the mare, the grief that threaded through every syllable. He had arrived in Lead 2 days ago, hired by the stable owner to help manage the increasing number of horses that came through as the mining town continued to grow, and he had been warned about the girl who refused to speak. Harrison was 23, tall and lean from years of working cattle drives and breaking horses across Montana and Wyoming territory. He had kind eyes the color of creek water and a quiet manner that came from spending more time with animals than people. The stable owner, a gruff man named Paulson who had taken pity on Victoria after her father's death, had explained the situation with uncomfortable brevity. "She does not talk. Do not push her. She does her work and she does it well. The horses love her. Just leave her be and we will have no problems." Harrison had nodded, understanding that silence was sometimes the only armor a person had against a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. He had his own scars, his own reasons for preferring the company of horses to the noise of saloons, and the false camaraderie of men who measured worth in gold dust and violence. His father had died when Harrison was 17, trampled by a spooked stallion, and his mother had followed 2 years later, her heart simply giving out from exhaustion and sorrow. He knew what it meant to carry grief like a stone in your chest. So he did not call out to Victoria that first morning, did not announce his presence or demand acknowledgement. He simply moved into the stable's rhythm, mucking stalls and hauling water, checking hooves and distributing feed with practiced efficiency. He watched her from the corners of his vision, noting how she moved with unconscious grace, how the horses calmed at her touch, how she sang softly to a nervous gelding who had been abused by his previous owner. Days passed in this careful dance of silence and awareness. Victoria knew the cowboy was there, of course. She had seen him that first morning, registered his presence with a sharp spike of anxiety that gradually dulled to wary acceptance when he made no effort to force conversation. He worked hard, she noticed. His hands were gentle with the animals, his voice low and soothing when he spoke to them. He did not drink himself stupid like so many of the miners, did not leer at her or make crude comments like some of the men who came to rent horses. He simply existed in the same space as her, respectful of the invisible boundaries she had drawn. On the 5th day, Harrison found a young colt with a gash on its foreleg, the wound angry and seeping. He knew enough about horse doctoring to clean it, but the colt was frightened, dancing away from his touch and rolling its eyes in panic. Harrison spoke softly, trying to calm the animal, but the colt only grew more agitated. Then Victoria was there, appearing at his elbow like a ghost. She did not look at Harrison, did not acknowledge him at all, but she moved toward the colt with slow deliberation, humming a melody that seemed to still the air itself. The colt's ears swiveled toward her, its trembling gradually subsiding as she extended her hand, palm up, letting it smell her skin. She murmured in Spanish, words Harrison could not understand but which clearly soothed the young horse. Within moments, the colt stood docile as Victoria examined the wound, her fingers careful and sure. She glanced at Harrison then, just for a heartbeat, and he understood what she needed without words being spoken. He handed her the clean cloth and the jar of salve, watched as she cleaned and dressed the wound with expert precision, her touch so gentle that the colt barely flinched. When she finished, she stepped back, still without speaking, and returned to her work on the other side of the stable. Harrison looked at the colt, now calm and trusting, and felt something shift in his chest. He had witnessed something almost sacred, he thought. A language beyond words, a communion of wounded creatures seeking to ease each other's pain. After that, they worked together in their silent partnership, communicating through gestures and shared understanding. Victoria would point to a saddle that needed mending, and Harrison would nod, setting to the repair with skilled hands. Harrison would indicate a horse that seemed off its feed, and Victoria would examine it, her diagnostic instincts sharp and true. Paulson watched this wordless collaboration with satisfaction, pleased that his gamble on the quiet cowboy had paid off. The spring rain came in the 2nd week, turning the streets of Lade into rivers of mud, and keeping most of the miners indoors, filling the saloons with restless energy and whiskey-fueled arguments. Victoria was grateful for the relative peace, for the excuse to stay in the stable where the drumming of rain on the roof created a cocoon of sound that drowned out the distant shouts and occasional gunfire. She was in Copper's stall, checking the mare's hooves, when she heard the commotion outside. Men's voices, angry and slurred. She froze, her heart rate quickening, old instincts flaring to life. Her father had always warned her about staying invisible, about not drawing attention from the kind of men who saw women as property to be claimed. Harrison heard it too. He set down the bridle he had been oiling and moved toward the stable doors, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert. 3 miners stumbled into the entrance, soaked from the rain and clearly drunk, their eyes adjusting to the dimness. "Need horses," one of them announced, his words slurring together. "Got business in Deadwood." Harrison stepped forward, placing himself between the men and the rest of the stable. "Stable is closed for the day. Rain is too heavy for safe travel. Come back tomorrow." The miner who had spoken, a thick-shouldered man with a scarred face, scowled. "We are paying customers. Get us horses." "Tomorrow," Harrison repeated, his voice steady but firm. "You are in no condition to ride, and I will not send animals out in this weather with drunk riders." The tension ratcheted higher. The second miner, younger but with mean eyes, sneered. "Think you can tell us what to do, cowboy? Maybe we just take what we want." Victoria pressed herself against the back of Copper's stall, barely breathing. She could see Harrison through the slats, could see the way he held himself loose and ready, his right hand hanging near the revolver at his hip. She had not seen him wear a gun before, had not realized he carried one. "You could try," Harrison said quietly, "but you would be making a mistake." The scarred miner laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then his gaze shifted, finding Victoria in the shadows. His expression changed, became predatory. "Well now, did not know the stable came with entertainment. Pretty little thing hiding back there." Victoria's blood turned to ice. Copper sensed her fear and stamped nervously. Harrison moved just slightly, but it was enough to draw the miner's attention back to him. "The lady works here. You need to leave. Now." "Lady," the young miner laughed. "That is Miguel's girl, the Mexican who does not talk." "She is not a lady. She is barely—" He did not get to finish the sentence. Harrison's fist connected with his jaw in a blur of motion, sending the miner sprawling backward into the mud outside. The scarred miner swore and reached for his own gun, but Harrison was faster, his revolver clearing leather and leveling at the man's chest before the miner's fingers touched the grip. "Leave," Harrison said, and there was something in his voice that brooked no argument, something hard as iron beneath the quiet exterior. "Do not come back unless you are sober and respectful." The third miner, who had been silent until now, grabbed the scarred man's arm. "Come on. Not worth dying over." They dragged their companion to his feet and retreated, muttering threats and curses, but they went. Harrison stood in the doorway until they disappeared into the rain-soaked street, then holstered his weapon and turned back to the stable. Victoria was standing in the open now, her dark eyes wide, her hands clenched at her sides. She stared at Harrison, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Then she nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude, and returned to her work. But something had changed. Harrison felt it, a subtle shift in the air between them. She had seen him defend her without asking for anything in return, had witnessed him risk violence to protect her dignity. And he had seen her vulnerability, the fear she carried, the weight of being alone in a world that could be casually cruel to a young woman without protection. The third week began with clear skies, and the kind of crystalline light that made the Black Hills look like something from a painting. Victoria rose early as always and went to the stable before the town fully woke. She found Harrison already there, brewing coffee over a small fire in the tack room, the smell rich and inviting. He looked up when she entered, held up a tin cup in silent question. She hesitated, then nodded. He poured her coffee, handed it to her without their fingers touching, and returned to his own cup. They drank in comfortable silence as the horses began to stir and greet the day. Victoria found herself studying him when he was not looking, noticing details she had overlooked before. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the small scar on his left hand, the careful deliberation with which he moved, as though he were always conscious of the space he occupied and the impact he might have. He was handsome, she realized, though not in the flashy way of the gamblers who pass through town. His was a quieter appeal, rooted in competence and steadiness. She wondered what his story was, what had brought him to lead, what ghosts he carried. She wondered if his silence was like hers, born of loss and the inadequacy of words to contain certain truths. That afternoon, a telegram arrived for Victoria. Paulson brought it to the stable, his expression uncomfortable. "It is from Santa Fe," he said, holding out the thin paper. "I am sorry, girl. I know you probably do not want to deal with this." Victoria took the telegram with shaking hands. She read it once, then again, the words blurring. Her father's brother, her Uncle Tomás, had written. He had heard of Miguel's death and was demanding that Victoria return to Santa Fe immediately. He claimed it was his duty to care for her, to find her a suitable husband, to ensure she was not living alone and unchaperoned in a mining town full of rough men. The telegram might have sounded concerned, but Victoria knew better. Tamaz had never approved of her father's decision to move north, had argued bitterly with Miguel about family obligation and tradition. Tamaz was a harsh man who believed women existed to serve men, to produce children and keep silent. The thought of living under his authority, of being married off to some friend of his, made Victoria feel physically ill. She crumpled the telegram in her fist, her breathing harsh. Paulson cleared his throat. "You do not have to go, you know. You are 18. You can make your own choices." But could she? Victoria looked around the stable at the life she had built here, fragile and tenuous. She had her father's small savings, enough for a few months, but what then? She could not run the blacksmith business alone. The work in the stable paid little. And if Tamaz came for her, if he made a legal claim, what recourse did she have? Harrison, who had been repairing a fence across the yard, approached slowly. He looked at Victoria's face, at the crumpled telegram, at Paulson's worried expression. "Trouble?" he asked quietly. Paulson explained the situation, and Harrison's jaw tightened. "She does not want to go." "I do not imagine she does, but what choice does she have?" Paulson shook his head. "I cannot pay her enough to truly support herself, and unmarried women in this town without protection." "Well, you saw what almost happened the other day." Victoria felt the walls closing in. The stable suddenly seemed too small, the air too thin. She thrust the telegram at Paulson and fled, not toward her room but out into the hills beyond town, where the pine trees grew thick and the sound of the mines faded to nothing. She ran until her lungs burned, until she found a rocky outcrop that looked down over the valley, and there she finally let herself cry. Not the silent tears she had shed for her father, but wrenching sobs that came from the deepest part of her chest, mourning not just what she had lost, but what she stood to lose, the fragile independence she had fought to maintain. She did not know how long she sat there, but when she finally looked up, the sun was lower in the sky and Harrison was standing a respectful distance away, holding the reins of 2 horses. Not copper, but a sturdy paint gelding and a gray mare that Victoria had always admired. He did not speak, did not approach. He simply stood there, waiting, giving her the choice. Victoria wiped her face with her sleeve, stood on shaking legs. She walked toward him, and he handed her the gray's reins without a word. They mounted in silence and rode together into the hills, following a trail that wound between ponderosa pines and granite outcroppings. The rhythm of the horse beneath her, the scent of pine sap and fresh air, the vast sky overhead, these things slowly soothed Victoria's ragged nerves. Harrison rode beside her, not pushing for conversation, simply present. They climbed higher to a meadow where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, where a small creek burbled over smooth stones. Harrison dismounted and let his horse drink. Victoria did the same. They stood on opposite sides of the creek, the water running between them, and Harrison finally spoke. "My mother used to say that grief is like water," he said, his voice soft. "You can try to dam it up, but eventually it finds a way through. Better to let it flow, to move with it rather than against it." Victoria looked at him across the water, really looked at him, and saw understanding in his eyes. Not pity, but recognition. The acknowledgement of one wounded soul to another. "I lost my father too," Harrison continued. 6 years ago. Thought I should have been able to prevent it. Carried that weight for a long time before I realized that some things are beyond our control. Death comes when it comes. All we can do is honor the people we loved by living as best we can." The words hung in the air, simple and true. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of guilt and grief that had been strangling her. She opened her mouth, closed it again. The silence had been her protection for so long, her way of keeping the world at a distance. But standing here with this quiet cowboy who asked nothing of her except to be human, she felt the words rising up, unstoppable. "I miss him," she said, and her voice was rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but the words were there. "I miss him so much it feels like dying." Harrison's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. "I know," he said simply, and somehow those two words were enough. They were more than enough. Victoria felt tears on her cheeks again, but these were different, cleaner somehow. She looked at this man who had stood quietly in the stable for 3 weeks, who had asked nothing of her, who had waited with the patience of stone for her to be ready. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time: hope. They rode back to town as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. When they reached the stable, Victoria unsaddled her horse with careful attention, brushed the gray down, checked her water and feed. Harrison worked alongside her, their movements synchronized from weeks of silent partnership. As she turned to leave to climb the stairs to her lonely room, Victoria paused. "Thank you," she said, the words still strange in her mouth after so long. "For today, for everything." Harrison nodded, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Anytime." The next morning, Victoria came to the stable and greeted Harrison with a quiet "good morning." They were the first words she had spoken to him directly, and his response was equally simple: "Morning." But in those small words was a world of possibility. Over the following days, Victoria found her voice returning gradually, like a spring thaw after a hard winter. She did not speak much, and never about things that did not matter, but she answered Harrison's occasional questions, shared observations about the horses, even laughed once when a young foal tried to steal his hat. They fell into conversations during their work, discussions about the animals in their care, about the best trails in the hills, about books they had read. Harrison had surprising depths, Victoria discovered. He had been educated by a schoolteacher mother who insisted her son know poetry as well as how to rope cattle, and he could quote Shakespeare and Whitman with the same ease he discussed horse breeding. Victoria, in turn, spoke about growing up in Santa Fe, about her mother's garden and her father's skill at the forge, about the Spanish songs her mother had taught her. She told Harrison about her fear of her uncle, about the telegram that still sat crumpled in her drawer, about the future that felt like a wall she could not climb. "So do not go," Harrison said one evening as they sat on the corral fence, watching the horses settle for the night. "Stay here. Build a life on your own terms." "With what money?" Victoria asked bitterly. "I have a few months of savings, maybe less." "Then what?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "There might be another option, if you were willing to consider it." Victoria turned to look at him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "What option?" He met her gaze directly, his eyes serious. "You could marry me." The words hung in the cooling air. Victoria stared at him, uncertain she had heard correctly. "What?" "It would be practical," Harrison said quickly, his usual calm rattled. "I mean not just practical. I care about you, Victoria. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength, your kindness with the animals, the way you have survived loss and kept going, I admire you. And I think we work well together. We understand each other." "You barely know me," Victoria whispered, though her heart was racing. "I know enough," Harrison said. "I know you are brave and smart and kind. I know you speak the truth when you speak at all. I know the horses trust you, and animals are better judges of character than most people. I know that when I think about the future, I find myself hoping you are in it." Victoria felt dizzy. "Harrison, I cannot ask you to do this just to protect me from my uncle." You are not asking. I am offering. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle. I will not lie and say I have been planning this. The idea came to me when I saw how worried you were, but once I thought it, it felt right. It feels right. We would be married, Victoria said, testing the word. Living together, sharing a life. Yes. Harrison's thumb moved across the back of her hand, a small, unconscious gesture. I would not expect. That is, we could take things slowly, get to know each other better. I would not pressure you for anything you were not ready to give. Victoria looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the fading light, his features were soft, his expression open and honest. She thought about the alternative, about being sent to Santa Fe to live under Tomas's control, about being married to a stranger chosen for his wealth or connections rather than his character. And she thought about the past 3 weeks, about the quiet comfort of working alongside this man, about the way he had defended her without being asked, about his patience and his gentle hands and the poetry he quoted while mending tack. I care about you too, she said softly. I did not want to. I did not want to care about anyone, because caring means risking loss, but you made it impossible not to care. Harrison's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and transformative. Is that a yes? It is a yes, Victoria said. And then she was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were choosing, by the relief of not being alone anymore. Harrison pulled her into an embrace, careful and respectful, and Victoria allowed herself to lean into his strength, to rest her head against his chest and hear the steady beat of his heart. They stood there as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss, choosing to build something new together. The practical matters moved quickly after that. Harrison spoke to Paulson, who was delighted by the news and offered to let them continue living in the quarters above the stable, with some modifications to make the space suitable for a married couple. Victoria sent a telegram to her uncle, informing him of her engagement and her decision to remain in lead. The response was predictably angry, but it was also impotent. She was 18 and legally able to make her own choices, and the distance between South Dakota and New Mexico made enforcement of Tomas's will impossible. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who passed through Lead monthly. Victoria wore a dress of deep blue that Harrison had insisted on buying for her, and Harrison wore his best shirt and vest, his hair combed back and his boots polished. Paulson stood as witness, along with a few of the more respectable townspeople who had come to know and like the quiet girl who worked in the stable. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar but weighted with new meaning. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Victoria gently, a soft press of lips that promised care and patience. Victoria felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of relief and tentative joy. That night, they climbed the stairs to their newly arranged living quarters, which now included a real bed that Harrison had purchased and a small table with 2 chairs. Harrison lit the lamp and turned to Victoria, suddenly awkward. I meant what I said before, he told her. We can take this as slowly as you need. I can sleep on the floor, or we can hang a curtain to divide the room, or Victoria stopped him by taking his hand. We are married, she said. I want to be your wife in truth, not just on paper, but you are right that we should take our time. Can we just lie together? Talk until we fall asleep. The relief on Harrison's face was almost comical. I would like that very much. They prepared for bed with shy formality, changing in separate corners before meeting under the covers of the bed that felt enormous and strange. They lay on their backs at first, a careful distance between them, staring at the ceiling. "This is awkward," Victoria said, and they both laughed, the tension breaking. Harrison turned on his side to face her. "Tell me something I do not know about you." Victoria thought for a moment, then said, "I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was young. I used to help my father with the horses at the smithy, and I loved healing them when they were hurt. But there was no money for that kind of education, and besides, women do not become veterinarians." "Maybe not in Santa Fe," Harrison said. "But out here, things are different, less rigid. If you wanted to learn more about animal medicine, I could help you. I know some things from working ranches, and we could maybe get books learned together." Victoria felt a swell of affection for this man who took her dreams seriously. "What about you? What did you want to be? A poet," Harrison admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Or a scholar? But my father needed help with the ranch, and after he died, I needed to earn money. Cowboy work paid better than sonnets." "You could still write," Victoria said. "In the evenings, I would read your poems." "And you could still learn to be a healer," Harrison replied. "We could both become who we wanted to be, just a little later than planned." They talked for hours that first night, sharing stories and dreams, fears and hopes. At some point, Victoria found herself nestled against Harrison's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. It felt natural and right, this closeness, this intimacy that went deeper than physical desire. "I am glad I spoke to you," Victoria whispered as sleep began to claim her. "I am glad you waited for me." "I would have waited longer," Harrison said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I would have waited forever if that was what you needed." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, two wounded people beginning to heal. The summer of 1882 unfolded with a sweetness Victoria had not anticipated. Marriage to Harrison was nothing like what she had feared marriage might be. He was patient and kind, affectionate without being demanding, interested in her thoughts and opinions. They worked side by side in the stable during the day, caring for the horses and managing the steady flow of customers. And in the evenings they would walk in the hills or sit by the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Their physical intimacy grew gradually, naturally. Kisses became longer, more heated. Gentle touches became bolder. One night in late June, as a thunderstorm rolled through the hills and rain drummed on the roof, Victoria turned to Harrison in their bed and whispered, "I am ready. I want all of you." Harrison made love to her with exquisite gentleness, taking his time, making sure of her pleasure before seeking his own. Victoria had heard stories from other women about the pain and awkwardness of the marriage bed, but with Harrison it was different. It was tender and intense and beautiful, a physical expression of the emotional intimacy they had been building. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, sweaty and breathless and grinning like fools, Harrison said, "I love you. I should have said it before now, but I love you, Victoria." "I love you too," Victoria replied, the words coming easily now, naturally. "I think I have loved you since you punched that miner for insulting me." Harrison laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "That is a strange moment to fall in love." "You made me feel protected," Victoria said. "Not like property to be guarded, but like a person whose dignity mattered. That meant everything to me." As summer deepened, Victoria and Harrison began to talk about the future in more concrete terms. They had saved enough money to consider buying a small piece of land outside town, maybe starting their own stable and horse breeding operation. Harrison's skills as a horsebreaker were well known, and Victoria's talent for healing and gentling troubled animals had earned her a reputation as well. In August, an opportunity presented itself. A rancher named Thompson, who owned land 5 miles north of Lead, wanted to retire and move to California to be near his daughter. He was selling his property, which included a small house, a good barn, and 30 acres of grazing land. The price was fair, more than Victoria and Harrison had saved, but not impossibly out of reach. They rode out to see the property on a bright morning when the air smelled of pine and wildflowers. The house was modest but well built, with 2 rooms and a sleeping loft. The barn was sturdy, with space for a dozen horses. The land rolled gently, with good grass and a creek running through the eastern section. Victoria stood in the doorway of the house, looking out at the view of the hills, and felt something settle in her chest. This could be home. This could be the place where they built a life, raised children, grew old together. "What do you think?" Harrison asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "I think it is perfect," Victoria said, "but we are short on the money we need." "I have been thinking about that," Harrison said. "We could take out a loan from the bank, use our savings for the down payment, and pay the rest over time. It would be tight for a while, but we could make it work." Victoria turned to face him. "Are you sure? That is a big risk." "The biggest risks often bring the greatest rewards," Harrison said. "And I believe in us. I believe we can make this work." They bought the ranch in September, signing the papers in the bank while Paulson witnessed and clapped Harrison on the back, proud of the young couple he had helped bring together. The first night in their new home was spent on the floor wrapped in blankets, too excited to sleep, making plans for how they would arrange the barn, what horses they would start with, how they would build their business. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in late October and blanketing the hills in white. Victoria and Harrison worked tirelessly to prepare, stocking feed and firewood, insulating the barn, making sure the house was sealed against the cold. They started with 4 horses, including Copper, whom Paulson had sold to them for a generous price. The work was hard, physically exhausting, and financially precarious. There were days when Victoria wondered if they had taken on too much, if they would be able to make the loan payments, if they were fools for thinking they could succeed. But then she would look at Harrison, his face ruddy from the cold and his eyes bright with determination, and she would remember why they were doing this. They were building something that was theirs, a future that they controlled. In December, Victoria realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Harrison one evening as they sat by the fire, the snow piling up outside their windows. "I think I am pregnant," she said, watching his face carefully. Harrison's expression went through a series of rapid changes: surprise, joy, concern, awe. "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain," Victoria said. "All the signs are there. I feel different." Harrison crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Victoria, we are going to be parents." Victoria laughed, her own eyes wet with tears. "Are you ready for this?" "Absolutely not," Harrison said honestly, "but I cannot wait." The pregnancy was hard in the beginning, with morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon and exhaustion that made every task feel monumental. Harrison took on more of the physical labor, insisting that Victoria rest, and she chafed at the restriction even as she appreciated his care. As winter gave way to spring, Victoria's belly began to swell, and with it came a sense of wonder that sometimes overwhelmed her. There was a life growing inside her, a child that was half her and half Harrison, a future that stretched out with possibility. She would press her hands to her stomach and feel movement, little flutters that grew stronger as the weeks passed, and she would marvel at the miracle of it. Harrison was devoted to her in those months, attentive to her needs, patient with her mood swings, endlessly fascinated by the changes in her body. He would talk to her belly at night, telling their unborn child about the horses and the ranch, about the life they were building, promising to teach them to ride and to read, to be kind and strong. In late July of 1883, as the summer heat pressed down on the hills and the cicadas sang their shrill song, Victoria went into labor. Harrison rode into Lead to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Victoria thought she could not continue, when the pain was too much and her strength was failing. But Harrison was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement and love, and somehow she found the will to push, to fight, to bring this child into the world. The baby was born just as the sun reached its peak, emerging with a lusty cry that filled the room with sound and life. Mrs. Patterson held up the infant, announcing, "It is a boy, a healthy, strong boy." Victoria, exhausted and euphoric, reached for her son as the midwife cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket. Harrison cut the cord with shaking hands, his face wet with tears. When Victoria held their baby for the first time, when she looked into his tiny scrunched face and saw Harrison's eyes and her own nose, she felt a love so fierce and complete that it seemed impossible her heart could contain it. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Henry Miguel Kane, honoring both Harrison's father and Victoria's. Henry was a demanding infant, colicky and loud, but Victoria and Harrison navigated the sleepless nights and endless diapers with patience and humor. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Henry when he cried, changing him without complaint, singing him songs in his rough cowboy voice. The ranch continued to grow. Word spread about the quality of their horses and Victoria's skill with difficult animals. People would bring her horses that were considered untamable, animals that had been abused or traumatized, and she would work her quiet magic, speaking to them in soft Spanish, earning their trust inch by inch until they were calm and trainable. Harrison built their reputation as a breaker of horses that other men had given up on. He had a gift for reading an animal's temperament, for knowing when to push and when to wait, and his horses sold for good prices at the market in Deadwood. By the time Henry was walking, the ranch was profitable enough that they had paid off a significant portion of their loan. They hired a young man named Jesse to help with the heavier work, and Victoria began to take on more of the business management, keeping the books and negotiating sales. Life settled into a rhythm that was demanding but satisfying. Victoria and Harrison would rise before dawn, tending to the animals and the endless tasks that came with running a ranch. Henry would toddle after them, learning to walk by holding onto fence posts, delighting in the horses and the dogs they had acquired. In the evenings, after Henry was asleep, Victoria and Harrison would sit on the porch they had built, watching the sun set over the hills, talking about their plans and dreams. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Victoria said one evening when Henry was 2 years old, nestled against Harrison's side. "After my father died, I thought happiness was done for me, but you proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong," Harrison said, kissing the top of her head. "I thought I would always be alone, always drifting, but you gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." In the autumn of 1885, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because her body was stronger from the hard work of ranch life. Harrison was thrilled at the prospect of another child, and Henry, though too young to fully understand, seemed excited by the idea of a sibling. The baby, a daughter they named Helen Rose, was born in the spring of 1886, arriving quickly and easily compared to Henry's difficult birth. She had Victoria's dark hair and Harrison's calm temperament, and from the moment she was placed in Victoria's arms, she seemed content with the world. With 2 children and a growing business, life became even more chaotic. But it was a good chaos, Victoria thought, the kind that came from abundance rather than scarcity. She and Harrison had built something remarkable from grief and silence, from a shared understanding and a willingness to take a chance on each other. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Henry learned to ride almost before he could run, showing a natural affinity for horses that delighted both his parents. Helen was quieter, more thoughtful, but she had her mother's gift for healing, often being found in the barn tending to a horse's scrape or speaking softly to a nervous animal. The ranch expanded. They bought an adjacent parcel of land when it became available, increasing their grazing area and allowing them to take on more horses. Harrison began training other men in his methods of horse breaking, and Victoria started writing down her knowledge of animal healing, creating a manual that would eventually be published by a small press in Rapid City. In 1890, when Henry was 7 and Helen was 4, Victoria found herself pregnant for a 3rd time. This was unplanned, a surprise that came when she thought her childbearing years might be over, and she approached it with a mixture of trepidation and joy. She was older now, 32, and the pregnancy was harder on her body. But Harrison was there every step of the way, as devoted as ever, picking up the slack when her energy flagged, entertaining the children when she needed rest, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. Their love had deepened over the years, becoming something richer and more complex than the tentative affection they had started with. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance, had weathered difficulties and celebrated triumphs together. The baby, another boy they named Hugh Thomas, arrived in late winter during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Mrs. Patterson could not reach them in time, so Harrison delivered his son himself, with Victoria guiding him through the process. It was terrifying and beautiful, this most intimate act of partnership, and when Hugh finally emerged, squalling and healthy, Harrison wept with relief and pride. 3 children, Victoria said later, exhausted but glowing, Hugh nursing at her breast while Harrison sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "We made 3 perfect children. We made a family," Harrison corrected gently. "We made a life, and it was true." The ranch that had started as a desperate gamble had become a thriving enterprise. The house had been expanded, now boasting 5 rooms and a real kitchen where Victoria could cook proper meals. The barn housed 15 horses at any given time, and they had hired 2 more workers to help manage the load. People came from across South Dakota, and even from Wyoming to buy horses that had been trained by Harrison Kane and healed by Victoria Kane. Their reputation was such that they could command premium prices, and the loan that had once seemed so daunting was paid off in full in 1892, 10 years after they had married. The day they made the final payment, Harrison and Victoria rode into Lead together, leaving the children with Jessie, his wife. They walked into the bank, handed over the money, and received the deed to their property, clear and unencumbered. Then they stood on the street, holding hands, looking at the paper that represented years of hard work and sacrifice. "We did it," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "We actually did it. You doubted?" Harrison asked with a smile. "Every single day," Victoria admitted, "but I did it anyway because I believed in you. In us." They celebrated that night at the small hotel in Lead, a rare night away from the children and the demands of the ranch. They ate a proper dinner in the dining room, drank wine, and danced to the music from a traveling pianist. In the privacy of their hotel room, they made love with the passion and tenderness that had only grown stronger over the years, celebrating not just their financial success, but the partnership they had forged. As they lay together afterward, Harrison said, "I have been thinking about something." "Always dangerous," Victoria teased, running her fingers through his hair, which was now touched with gray at the temples. "I want to write a book," Harrison said. "About horses, about training methods, about everything we have learned, and I want your healing manual to be part of it. I want us to leave something behind, knowledge that can help people long after we are gone." Victoria propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him. "I think that is a wonderful idea. We could work on it together in the evenings after the children are asleep." "It might take years," Harrison warned. "We have years," Victoria said simply. "We have the rest of our lives." The book did take years, nearly 5 of them. Harrison and Victoria would work on it in stolen moments, writing by lamplight, debating the best way to explain complex concepts, revising and refining. Henry, Helen, and Hugh grew up seeing their parents as partners in every sense, equal contributors to both the ranch and the family, and this shaped how they viewed the world and their place in it. In 1897, the book was published by a regional press, titled Healing and Training, a comprehensive guide to horse husbandry by Harrison and Victoria Kane. It was not a bestseller by any means, but it sold steadily, finding its audience among ranchers and horse breeders across the West. Victoria and Harrison would sometimes receive letters from readers, thanking them for the insights, sharing their own successes, and it filled them both with pride. The children grew into remarkable young people. Henry, tall and strong like his father, had a natural talent for working with horses and began taking on more responsibility at the ranch. Helen, now a teenager, had developed her mother's healing abilities to an extraordinary degree and talked about studying veterinary medicine when she was older. Hugh, the baby, was clever and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Victoria watched her children with amazement, sometimes unable to believe that these confident, capable young people had come from her body, that she and Harrison had created them and raised them and loved them into being. She thought about the girl she had been at 18, silent and scared, speaking only to horses, and she marveled at the distance she had traveled. One evening in the summer of 1900, as Victoria and Harrison sat on their porch watching the sun set, she said, "Do you remember when we first met? When I would not speak to you for 3 weeks?" Harrison laughed, reaching for her hand. "How could I forget? You were the most stubborn woman I had ever encountered." "And you were the most patient man," Victoria replied. "I have never asked you this, but why did you wait? Why did you not push me to speak, demand acknowledgement?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because I recognized something in you, a hurt that needed time to heal, and because the horses trusted you and I trusted the horses' judgment. I figured if I gave you space, you would come to me when you were ready. And if I had never been ready, then I would have continued working beside you in silence," Harrison said simply. "Being near you was enough. Though I am very glad you eventually spoke to me, because the last 18 years have been the best of my life." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from overwhelming gratitude and love. "Mine too. You saved me, Harrison. You and the horses and this life we built together." "We saved each other," Harrison corrected, lifting her hand to kiss her knuckles. "That is how the best partnerships work." As the years continued to unfold, the Kane Ranch became a fixture in the Black Hills region, known for quality horses and ethical treatment of animals. Henry eventually married a school teacher named Rebecca, and they built a house on the western edge of the property, starting their own family. Helen did pursue veterinary education, studying through a correspondence course and apprenticing with a veterinarian in Rapid City, becoming one of the few female veterinarians in the region. Hugh, brilliant and restless, eventually left for college in the East, though he returned every summer to work the ranch and remind himself of his roots. Victoria and Harrison grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by the hard work of ranch life, but their love remained constant, a foundation that never wavered. They had built something lasting, not just in the physical sense of the ranch and the legacy of their work, but in the family they had created, in the way they had loved each other and their children, in the example they had set of partnership and mutual respect. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. All three of them were there with their families, Henry and Rebecca with their 3 children, Helen with her husband Michael and their 2, Hugh with his new bride Sarah. The house and barn were decorated with bunting, and a feast was laid out on long tables in the yard. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed, Victoria and Harrison slipped away to their favorite spot by the creek, where they had ridden on that first day she had spoken to him. They sat on the bank, their shoulders touching, listening to the water flow and the evening birdsong. 30 years, Victoria mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Time is strange that way, Harrison agreed, but I would not trade a single day of it. Even the hard ones, the scary ones, they all brought us here. To this moment, Victoria said, to this life, to us. Harrison turned to her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. I love you, Victoria Kane. I loved you when you spoke only to horses, and I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Victoria kissed him, tasting salt and sweetness, decades of shared life in the press of their lips. And I love you, Harrison Kane. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. They stayed by the creek until the stars emerged, holding hands like young lovers, old lovers, eternal lovers. The ranch stretched out around them, the product of their labor and love, and the future rolled on, generation after generation. All of it rooted in that moment when a grieving girl had finally spoken to a patient cowboy, and 2 wounded souls had chosen to heal together. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that make up a full life. There were weddings and births, illnesses and recoveries, successes and setbacks. Through it all, Victoria and Harrison remained each other's anchor, the still point in a turning world. In 1920, Harrison was thrown from a particularly stubborn stallion and broke his leg badly. He was 61, and the recovery was slow and painful. Victoria nursed him with the same gentle care she had always given to wounded animals, sitting with him through the long nights when the pain was worst, reading to him from the books he loved, reminding him that patience was his own best advice. I am too old to be breaking horses, Harrison grumbled one day as Victoria changed the dressing on his leg. Nonsense, Victoria said firmly. You are too experienced to be taking unnecessary risks. There is a difference. Let Henry and the others handle the dangerous ones. You can supervise. Supervise, Harrison repeated with distaste. I am being put out to pasture. Victoria laughed, leaning down to kiss him. You are being asked to be wise instead of stubborn, and to stay alive because I am not done with you yet. Harrison healed. though he walked with a slight limp afterward and did take on a more supervisory role at the ranch. This gave him more time to write, and he began work on a second book, this one a collection of essays and memoirs about life in the West, about the changes he had witnessed, about the frontier that was slowly disappearing. Victoria, for her part, had developed a small but dedicated practice treating animals throughout the region. People would bring their sick or injured livestock to her, trusting her skills more than the traditional veterinarians. She worked with Helen, the two of them forming a formidable team, and together they pioneered several new treatment methods that would eventually be adopted more widely. On Victoria's 60th birthday, in 1924, the entire family gathered once again. The ranch was now run primarily by Henry and his oldest son, with Harrison and Victoria having eased into a well-earned semi-retirement. The celebration was joyous, with Victoria surrounded by children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren toddling around on chubby legs. As she surveyed the gathering, Victoria felt a wave of emotion so strong it took her breath away. All of this, the laughter and love, the family and the legacy, had come from a choice she had made 42 years ago. A choice to speak, a choice to trust, a choice to love. Harrison appeared at her elbow, handing her a glass of lemonade. "Overwhelming, is it not?" "In the best way," Victoria agreed. "I never imagined this, Harrison, never imagined I could have so much." "You deserved it all and more," Harrison said. "You deserved the world, and I am glad I could give you at least this piece of it." They stood together, watching their family, and Victoria thought about the girl who had spoken only to horses, who had been so afraid of being hurt again that she had locked herself in silence. That girl was still inside her somewhere, but she had been transformed by love, had grown into a woman who was strong and capable and deeply, profoundly happy. The seasons turned, as they always do. Victoria and Harrison moved through their 70s with grace, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp, their love undiminished. They spent their days in simple pleasures, tending a garden, taking slow walks, playing with their great-grandchildren, reading in the evenings by the fire. In the spring of 1932, Harrison fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came from Lead, did what he could, but at 73, Harrison's body could not fight the infection as it once had. Victoria sat by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering all the things she had told him 1,000 times but could never say enough. "I love you. You are the best man I have ever known. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible." Harrison, his breathing labored, squeezed her hand weakly. "No regrets?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Not a single one," Victoria said, her tears falling freely now. "Every moment with you was a gift." "Good," Harrison said, and he smiled, that same gentle smile that had won her heart so many years ago. "That is all I ever wanted. For you to be happy." He died as the sun set, Victoria's hand in his, their children gathered around them. Victoria felt the moment he left, felt the absence of him like a physical wound, and she bent over his body and wept for the loss of the man who had been her partner, her best friend, her heart. The grief was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But this time, Victoria did not retreat into silence. She had learned that lesson long ago. She spoke of her pain to her children, let them comfort her, accepted their love and support. She spoke of Harrison to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter and the occasional tear. She continued living at the ranch, though she moved into the smaller house that Henry and Rebecca had once occupied, giving the main house over to them and their family. She still worked with the horses when she felt up to it, still consulted on difficult cases, still wrote in the journal she had kept for decades, documenting her life and thoughts. Victoria lived another 8 years after Harrison's death, years that were marked by both loneliness and gratitude. She missed him every single day, but she also felt his presence in everything around her, in the ranch they had built, in the children they had raised, in the legacy they had created together. She spent her final years surrounded by love, watching her family continue to grow and thrive, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a full and meaningful life. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and think about the journey she had taken, from the scared, silent girl in the stable to the matriarch of a sprawling, happy family. Victoria Kane died peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1940, at the age of 76. She was buried next to Harrison on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so vast and blue, it seemed to go on forever. Her funeral was attended by more than 100 people, family, friends, former clients, people whose lives she had touched in ways large and small. At the gathering afterward, Henry stood to speak about his mother, his voice breaking with emotion. She taught us that silence can be powerful, but connection is essential. That grief is real and valid, but it does not have to define us. That love, real love, is about partnership and respect, about seeing each other truly and choosing each other every single day. She and my father built something remarkable here, not just this ranch, but a family rooted in kindness and strength. We will honor her memory by continuing that legacy. And they did. The Kane Ranch continued to operate for decades more, passing through the generations, always maintaining the principles of ethical treatment and quality work that Victoria and Harrison had established. The book they had written together remained in print, becoming something of a classic in equestrian circles. Their story was passed down through the family, becoming part of the mythology that held them together. The small house where Victoria and Harrison had first lived was eventually turned into a kind of museum by their great-grandchildren, preserved as it had been in those early days, a testament to where it all began. Visitors to the ranch could see the stable where Victoria had spoken only to horses for 3 weeks, where a quiet cowboy had waited patiently for her to be ready, where 2 lonely people had found each other and built a love that lasted a lifetime. In the end, Victoria Navarro Kane's legacy was not just the ranch or the books or the innovative treatment methods she had developed. It was the family she had created, the love she had nurtured, and the proof that even the deepest wounds can heal when met with patience, kindness, and the courage to speak when you are ready. She had taken her grief and transformed it into something beautiful, had turned silence into song, had chosen love even when it terrified her. And that choice, made by a grieving girl to a patient cowboy on a spring day in 1882, echoed forward through generations, a ripple of love and hope that would never truly end. The horses still grazed on the land Victoria and Harrison had claimed, the creek still ran clear and cold, and the sunset still painted the black hills in shades of gold and rose, just as it had on that day when she finally spoke to him, and everything changed. Their love story was complete, fully lived and fully realized, a testament to the transformative power of patience, the healing nature of time, and the enduring strength of 2 people who chose to build a life together from the ashes of loss. It was a story that ended not with tragedy or uncertainty, but with satisfaction and peace, with a family thriving and a legacy secure, with 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other until death and beyond. The sun set over the Kane Ranch one final time in this telling, casting long shadows across the land that held so many memories, so much history, so much love. And if you listened carefully, you might almost hear the echo of Victoria's voice speaking softly to the horses, might catch a glimpse of Harrison's quiet smile, might feel the presence of a love that time itself could not diminish. Their story was done, their ending achieved, their happily ever after earned and lived and celebrated for all the years they were given, and all the years beyond, in the hearts and lives of those who came after, who carried their love forward into an ever unfolding future.